ShadowTalk.
Hello and welcome to ShadowTalk, a weekly discussion of the latest cyber threat intelligence. Today we cover the VPN Filter malware that has infected over 500,000 network devices worldwide. With suggestions the botnet is set to attack Ukraine in the very near future, we pick through the reporting to make sense of exactly what we know and what's still mere speculation. In other news, we cover new research on the Triton malware affecting industrial control systems, new techniques for the Roaming Mantis malware, and finally, we have updates on vulnerabilities related to VBScript and the Spectre Meltdown attacks. All this to come on this week's ShadowTalk. Thank you for joining us in this week's episode. With me today is Harriet Grimm. Welcome, Harriet.
Hey.
And back again, yes, he's caught the podcasting bug. It's Dr. Richard Gold. Hi, Rich.
Hi there.
All right, without further ado, let's get started. So one of the big stories in the InfoSec community this week was VPN Filter. Now, this is the name of a malware identified by Cisco Talos, who produced a report detailing how the malware had been used to target routers across the world. The report soon got considerable airtime across news sites and social media, with suggestions that the botnets created with this malware were being staged for a disruptive attack against Ukrainian infrastructure. Now, Harriet, for those who may not be au fait with the story, can you give us an outline of what's been reported?
Yeah, no problem. So as you said, this is an absolutely huge story this week, which is pretty unsurprising given the number of infections. As you said, it's a modular malware, which is detected on around 500,000 network devices across 54 countries. So primarily small home office networking gear and network attached storage devices, so NAS devices, were targeted through an unknown vector at this stage, although a lot of those devices have things like default credentials or have vulnerabilities which wouldn't be likely patched. So the reporting was released because the researchers observed several large spikes in infections, which predominantly were in the Ukraine over May. And also the malware contains a kill function, which can essentially brick a device. This got a lot of people worried and was really widely covered in the media. So shortly after the initial reporting broke, which was on Wednesday, there were a couple of interesting developments. The first of which was that the FBI had seized one of the C2 domains associated with the first stage malware. And the second interesting point was that they actually made an attribution call to the Russia link group APT28. And I think Richie can talk through a little bit more of the technical indicators that were seen in that malware.
So the VPN Filter malware is a 3-stage malware affecting SOHO routers. We've seen devices from Linksys, Microtik, Netgear, and TP-Link being affected. So those are routers, but then also QNAP NAS devices, which is quite an interesting development. So it works on both the x86 architecture, which is what you have in your laptops, desktops, those kind of things, and also the MIPS processor architecture, which is more common for embedded devices. So the stages work in the following way. The first stage is delivered through some mechanism, as Harriet mentioned, some kind of end-day exploit or weak creds or command injection or something like this. The devices that we're talking about are more for the home users or the small offices. So you can buy these devices from £50 on Amazon, something like this. So they're not the top of the range kind of devices we're talking about here. So once the device is infected, the stage 1 malware adds itself to the cron, which is the Unix Linux task for dealing with scheduled repeated events, and uses that to maintain persistence. So then it reaches out to get the stage 2 of the malware. And this is where the kind of funky C2 tricks we're seeing come from. It's quite cute. So it connects to the photobucket.com image sharing site and pulls down from a set of galleries, pulls down the first image from the gallery. The image has the EXIF metadata for storing the location information. So, for example, if you're on holiday, you take a picture, the EXIF data can store the location from the GPS in your phone, so you can see, oh, I was on holiday in this location, to see where you were. The threat actors in this case use this information as a place to store an IP address, which is then their C2 channel, which is quite an interesting technique. If that particular technique fails, it then tries to reach out to a domain, and as Harriet mentioned, that's currently sinkholed by the FBI. If that fails, then the malware goes into a listening mode, where it sits there observing the network traffic coming in, and if a particular trigger packet arrives, it will attempt to download the full payload from the device that's connecting into it. This stage 2 is also non-persistent. So if you reboot the router, which would be one of the guidance that's been given, the stage 2 will disappear as a result. It also uses Tor for C2 for receiving commands and being controlled in that way. And the major concern, as also was mentioned earlier, is that it has a kill command. So this kill command overwrites the first 5,000 bytes of the internal storage with zeros. This effectively bricks the device, renders it inoperable. If you would reboot then the device, it wouldn't be able to load the operating system and would just be completely unusable. And of course, the main concern is if you can imagine a destructive attack which would brick 500,000 routers simultaneously or near simultaneously would be quite something. Now, once the more fully featured stage 2 implant is in place, it can download additional plugins. This is what's also called the stage 3. And there are 2 ones which have been observed. There's likely more which have been developed. So the first one steals the credentials for websites. That's probably using something like dsniff, like a well-known pen testing tool, which sniffs network traffic looking for HTTP, basic auth, looking for FTP credentials, these kind of things. And the other thing, which is quite surprising, is it has a module for sniffing Modbus traffic. Modbus is a SCADA protocol used particularly for industrial control systems and the like. And this is an unusual twist. You would not typically imagine that a Soho router would be connected to a Modbus system, that there would be a SCADA system directly behind such a device. So it's an unusual one. One possible explanation is that this malware is capable of targeting other devices which are connected to industrial control systems, which are based on a similar platform, like MIPS or x86, but that's currently just speculation. The malware looks quite overpowered for standard criminal work. It has a lot of espionage capabilities built into it, and it's extensible as these pluggable modules. It seems to be quite a full-featured attack platform.
So you alluded a bit to it there, Richard, when you were talking about the relative sophistication here. So as always, attribution has been a central feature of this story. In this case, well, you guessed that the malware has been attributed to APT28, which is widely believed to be an arm of the Russian intelligence services. Harriet, what exactly has this attribution been based on? And second question would be, do you buy it?
So at the moment, I'm certain that all the evidence for this attribution is not public. So basically what we're going off of this is an affidavit published by the US Department of Justice. So they made the claim that it was APT28 based on the fact that some of the VPN filter malware shared some code overlap with a malware variant called Black Energy. This malware has been shared on criminal forums, so it was also associated with some of the 2015 attacks on Ukrainian power grids. So what the other interesting thing was basically that in the affidavit, they stated that APT28 was the same as a group that's known as Sandworm. So Sandworm is a group that was actually originally linked to using Black Energy to target the Ukrainian power grids. And typically in open source reporting, they've kind of been tracked as distinct groups. So this is an interesting combination of those two groups that were previously thought of as being distinct. I guess at the moment, there's not really enough open source evidence for that to be the attribution to be independently confirmed. So currently going off a code overlap, which is from malware that's available on criminal forums, so it's not really known to be bespoke to a particular group. That wouldn't be sort of a high confidence attribution. So definitely probably be more to come out around this going forward.
Yeah, I would just say that the Black Energy Group has targeted routers in embedded devices in the past, so that certainly fits into their MO that we've seen to date. Also, this code overlap, which was in the particular way that the RC4 cipher was being initialized, could be done, could be a coincidence, could be a deliberate piece of code sharing, could be a certain small piece of software has been taken by one developer to another location. There are many different explanations as to why this code overlap has happened. And as Harriet mentioned, would reduce the confidence that you'd have in this attribution as a result.
Again, I'd briefly like to talk about this FBI sinkholing activity. How effective do you think this is? And would we be wrong to assume that this has solved the problem?
So the sinkholing, it was kind of a incredible sort of chain of events where the sinkholing information came out, and it was almost like all of the hype just completely went away. And from what I understand, or how I understand the C2 process is working, for devices that potentially haven't been rebooted, there still could be attacker control over those if, for example, the third stage plugins that Rich mentioned were still installed. If a device is rebooted, then it would obviously go through the process of first calling the photo bucket domains, which have now been taken down, and then secondly, going to that FBI sinkhole domain. So then they would have access to the IP addresses that were contacting that domain. But yeah, for those devices that haven't been rebooted at this stage, as well as I understand that they potentially would still be under the attacker control. Rich, I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the already infected devices will be controlled via the Tor C2 that the malware performs, or the malware uses. So if it's already been infected, the effect of this sinkholing of the domain and the removal of the photo bucket galleries just prevents from new infections happening with this particular configuration. Now, the attackers are not going to be standing still. They'll be coming up with new ways to infect their targets. But for the devices which are already infected, unless they're rebooted to remove stage 3 and stage 2, they will continue to be under the attacker control for the foreseeable future.
And finally, Rich, all things considered, what a type of organization should be concerned about this, and what should they be doing in response?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this touches on one of the really interesting developments that's been happening in cybersecurity in recent years, and that is the shift of these more high-level hacking campaigns, potentially nation state. They begin to affect regular users, normally people who, unless you were a defense contractor or a major financial institution, you probably weren't too concerned about nation state activity. And now, due to the way that this activity has spilled out to the internet at large, we see that these devices, which are, as I mentioned, bargain basement entry-level devices for end users, for small offices, are now part of a potentially nation-state hacking campaign. So now we're in the sort of slightly unusual position of trying to give guidance to home users about how to defend themselves against a nation-state, which is obviously quite strange. Practically, as mentioned, the devices should be rebooted. If you have the capability to go in and look for some of the indicators of compromise which are present in the Cisco Talos article, then that's, of course, a useful way to know that if you've been infected or not. Otherwise, if you're out of an overabundance of caution, you may want to re-image the device, perform a factory reset. But that may not be possible. You may not have, people may not have access to the skills or capabilities to be able to do that, in which case we'll have to be just happy with people just pulling the plug and power cycling the device.
All right, staying in the realm of ICS and SCADA targeting, there's been more research this week around the Trisis or Triton malware. This should prick the ears of anyone in the critical national infrastructure or manufacturing sectors. So this new research focuses on a threat actor named Xenotype, Xeno with an X, which has been linked to the targeting of industrial control systems and the Triton malware itself. Rich, to begin, could you explain what Triton or Trisis actually is and why it's significant to sectors such as critical national infrastructure?
I think the really interesting takeaway for the Trisis malware is the fact that it targets not just industrial control systems, but a specific subset, and that is safety instrumented systems, or SIS. These are systems which are there to keep other industrial control systems, other industrial processes from malfunctioning. So to prevent things from overheating, overpressurization, overspeeding, all these kinds of things. So the fact that these safety systems are being deliberately targeted is quite a dramatic shift from what we've seen before. Now, the Trisis instance that we've seen to date, that's been discussed in the open source reporting, describes an attack which is very specific. It's targeting a specific plant somewhere in the Middle East, we believe. It's targeting a specific process, specific network. So it's a highly tailored, highly specific attack. This means that they can't really scale from this to attacking other safety instrumented systems directly without significant work being done. But the fact that a framework has been built for exactly this task is rather concerning. It's worth keeping in mind that the Trisis implant is then coming at the end of an intrusion. So it is after the attackers have already gained access, have already moved through the network, moved laterally, have already jumped, most likely between different networks, to jump from an IT network to a control systems network. And then it makes sense to deploy this Trisis malware. So the Xenotype threat actor group is using quite standard APT tradecraft to perform the initial intrusion, to move around, as I mentioned, to maintain persistence. So this group clearly is demonstrating the capability to do what many regular APT groups do, but then have this step at the end, which really takes it beyond what we've seen in the past. And as mentioned, the direct targeting of systems designed to keep people safe and industrial processes safe is certainly a concerning development.
I think the other interesting thing to note about this report from Dragos is that it was saying a shift in the targeting geography as well. So it was sort of saying that the group had shifted from targeting the Middle East to other states, including the United States, and that they were currently active. So I guess there's a heightened or an elevated level of threat coming from that group, or they assess it to be at the moment.
So next up, we have Roaming Mantis, a malware family that's updated its tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. So Harriet, what type of malware are we talking about here?
So yeah, this is a pretty interesting malware from a financially motivated actor. So it's been in active development since last year. It started off using sort of SMS phishing messages to get people to download malicious applications. But they basically updated it. So they're using DNS spoofing to deliver a mixture of Android malware and phishing pages, and also hosting cryptocurrency miners on landing pages. This recent incident kind of demonstrated that they'd expanded their targeting to include about 27 different languages, although I think the affected geographies were primarily Russia, Ukraine, and India. So yeah, the really kind of the more interesting element of this is their use of DNS spoofing. It's not really clear at the moment how they actually go about it. So as we mentioned earlier, these sorts of things could be via default credentials or brute force attacks. And also we don't have that much of an idea of who's behind it at the moment. There are some Chinese language strings in the malware, but yeah, that's not really enough to go off at the moment regarding attribution. But yeah, quite an interesting little development there, and it seems to be quite widely distributed as well.
Now, as always, we like to bring you a quick roundup of the latest vulnerability news. Harriet, will you do the honors here?
My pleasure. So this week it was a bit drowned out with some of the other news, but there was some more microprocessor speculative execution vulnerabilities related to Spectre and Meltdown. So those are obviously massive news in January. These have just come out now, and there seems to be, it'll be likely that more vulnerabilities kind of this vein will keep coming up, I think. So at the moment, there haven't been any known attacks in the wild leveraging these or the previous Spectre Meltdown vulnerabilities either. So yeah, it's just an interesting set of vulnerabilities to keep coming out. And then secondly, there was 2 proof of concept exploit codes published to GitHub for CV 2018-8174, which is a Visual Basic scripting vulnerability. This was reported maybe 6 weeks ago or so, I think, as the double kill vulnerability, which the Dark Hotel group targeted as a 0-day. So yeah, now those POCs have been released, probably expected to get picked up a little bit more. So its most effective way to be exploited is if it's delivered through Lua Word documents, which then retrieve the exploit from a remote server, because this can force a machine to load Internet Explorer to retrieve that, even if that's not the default browser on that machine. So yeah, quite an interesting one. We've obviously seen it go from being a 0-day and actively targeted to the POCs being published.
To wrap up, let's have a key takeaway from each of you. Harriet, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so I think this week it's been quite interesting to see sort of continued targeting of devices, which I guess are a bit low-hanging fruit. So things that are internet-facing, which might have default creds or, vulnerabilities which haven't been patched and things like that by groups potentially that are nation-state associated. So yeah, I guess those are devices that are out there and will continue to cause issues.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I find that as well. That's quite interesting that now these devices, which nobody really considered to be that significant from a security standpoint, turn out to actually be quite essential for many of these attacks. And we notice as well that these devices tend to be old Linux distributions. Probably, if they're not unpatched, they're probably hard to patch. They don't have monitoring, which is then accessible by the end user typically. They don't have logging, which is also visible in that sense. And they don't have any antivirus, which we would be associated with a desktop machine, maybe even some mobile devices. So they are also in a great position for an attacker. They give you access to a network. You can, if you want to look at the traffic which is passing through, you have the opportunity to perform man-in-the-middle attacks. They're a great network position for an attacker, and they're also very poorly defended, which is a wonderful combo for attackers out there.
Thank you very much to the both of you. Well, that's the end of this week's Shadow Talk. Thank you for listening and have a good week. For more research and commentary from the Digital Shadows team, visit resources@digitalshadows.com.